But the Baker Mayfield component here is interesting. So Baker lost two great offensive coordinators last couple of years. Liam Cohen, he's in first place with the Jags, and Dave Canales, first place with the Panthers. So Baker's always been a great comeback story, but Baker Mayfield is 1-9 in primetime games. He's not Mahomes, Allen, he's not Stafford, he's not that kind of talent. He's very dependent on his coordinator. And what did Tampa do when they lost Liam Cohen? You know what I don't like? They hired a guy who was in-house. Now the offense stinks. Baker didn't get worse. They added Imuka, the receiver from Ohio State. They should be a better offense. And Imuka, they should be a better offense. They're worse, far worse. What did the Eagles do when they lost Kellen Moore? They hired in-house. The Eagles offense, broken. What did the Lions do when Ben Johnson left? Well, let's just hire the guy down the hall. Lions offense is not the same. Tampa Bay did it. Michigan football. Let's replace Harbaugh with a guy down, 2 doors down in the facility. Stop. The NFL is too big of a business to hire proximity. Sometimes it works, but if you lose Ben Johnson, if you're losing Liam Cohen and Dave Canales, who are head coaches, is the guy you give the job to, the in-house guy, is he going to be an NFL head coach someday? So Baker last year, top 5 red zone offense in the NFL. Now they're 22nd. How? They added a great wide receiver. Last year, they were first in the league on third downs. Now they're 18th. Everything has dropped off a map. They were a top 5 offense last year. They add a star receiver out of Ohio State, and now they're a bottom feeder. So I know everybody thinks I'm crazy on this offensive, defensive coach. I think you should hire offensive coaches. I think there are exceptions. And I don't know if Todd Bowles is a great coach. The problem being, if you hire a defensive coach and he does nail it with the OC within a year or 2 leaves. Then you've got to nail it again. And Todd Bowles went, he nailed it again. And then that guy leaves. Who's going to go 3 for 3 on hiring brilliant offensive coordinators? So Shanahan, Andy Reid, McVay, Sean Payton, they don't have to worry about that as offensive coaches. They know the scheme. They're offensive guys. So that's the danger in a defensive head coach. I like Baker, but Baker's not a great quarterback. He gets hot. He's a streaky quarterback, but he is very reliant on a sharp young coordinator. The Eagles did it. The Buccaneers have done it. The Lions did it. Michigan football has a whole different issues there, but Michigan football did it. The greater the candidate who leaves, the greater the candidate you've got to replace, the wider the search has to be.
All right, let's dive into this topic. I'm confident many of you anticipate I'm about to unleash a critique on Baker Mayfield. And to be fair, I'd have every justification to do so, given my consistent stance throughout this season. I've maintained that Baker Mayfield isn't the transcendent player some have portrayed him to be, that he's not the MVP and doesn't operate on Josh Allen's tier. The backlash was swift and intense, with many dismissing my perspective entirely, labeling me clueless while proclaiming Baker as an elite, top 5 quarterback and the clear MVP frontrunner destined to lead the Buccaneers to the Super Bowl. Well, the narrative has shifted considerably since then. My skepticism extended beyond just Baker. Before the season even began, I voiced concerns about the Buccaneers' offensive coordinator situation following the departure of Liam Cohen. I suggested that loss was significant. The counter-argument I received was that Baker elevates his coordinators. Let's examine that. How are Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars performing currently? And how were they before Liam Cohen arrived? The contrast is stark. Coaching and schematic design matter profoundly. That point should now be unequivocal. Here's a fundamental truth I see in today's NFL. There is essentially one quarterback I believe possesses the greatest inherent resilience to subpar coaching, the one who can consistently manufacture production without an elite offensive architect. That player is Josh Allen, owing to his unparalleled dual-threat versatility. This isn't to suggest he doesn't need great coaching to maximize his potential or finally clear the Super Bowl hurdle. He absolutely does. But his raw, physical toolkit allows him to overcome schematic deficiencies in a way few others can. Virtually every other quarterback, in my view, is far more susceptible to the quality of their surrounding structure, particularly their play caller. I recall a clip from Greg Cosell, which I featured in an Eagles analysis, where he dissected quarterbacks posting impressive stats. He pointed out that while fans marvel at a great quarterback throw, often the reality is that the route concept was brilliantly designed. The reads were clearly defined, and the throw itself was one any competent NFL quarterback should make. His underlying message was that offensive system, play design, and timing frequently deserve as much, if not more, credit than the individual quarterback. This brings us to Baker Mayfield's core issue, in my estimation. He often believes he is capable of more than his skill set reliably allows. We witnessed this in the recent game. He attempts to conjure escape acts from pressure reminiscent of Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. While he can pull this off sporadically, especially against lesser defenses, it proved disastrous in this instance. However, I will also mount a defense of Baker here. He is not the caliber of quarterback who can routinely overcome a porous offensive line and consistent pressure. Furthermore, as I've stated repeatedly, he has a pronounced tendency to put the football in jeopardy. He consistently ranks near the top of the league in turnover-worthy plays. Earlier in the season, fortune smiled upon him. Many of those risky decisions didn't result in interceptions. The retort from supporters was, should have, would have, could have interceptions don't count. But they do matter from an analytical and coaching standpoint. I recall watching a breakdown by Kurt Warner, the Hall of Fame quarterback, not the running back, late one night, where he meticulously analyzed should-have-been interceptions from various quarterbacks. That is precisely what proper coaching entails, identifying those near misses, discussing why the throw was untenable, and correcting the decision-making process. To dismiss them as irrelevant is to ignore a critical part of player development and game evaluation. Eventually, that luck runs out, and it has for Baker. He threw a crushing interception in this game. While you could credit the defender for reading his eyes, the more consequential error was missing a wide-open Chris Godwin on a play that would have essentially sealed the victory. That miss was arguably the primary catalyst for the loss. To be perfectly clear, my intent here is not to place the entirety of the blame on Baker Mayfield's shoulders. This initial commentary is, in part, a reaction to the overwhelming hype he received earlier, when some analysts had him atop MVP boards and the discourse felt disconnected from reality. It seemed like a bizarro world scenario where the arguments were contradictory. One moment, the Buccaneers were a stacked roster destined for the Super Bowl. The next, Baker was single-handedly carrying an injured team to new heights, proving his greatness. And then, when struggles emerged, none of it was his fault. It was all on Todd Bowles or other factors. The cognitive dissonance was puzzling. In my view, this Buccaneers team was consistently overvalued this season, and the Baker Mayfield hype crescendoed to an unsustainable volume. Consider this. Kirk Cousins outplayed him in this very contest. No one would argue Cousins has superior weaponry or a more advantageous coaching situation. The Atlanta Falcons, frankly, were a charitable opponent in this game, committing a staggering 19 penalties for 125 yards. They repeatedly tried to hand the victory to Tampa Bay, including multiple failed two-point conversion attempts. The game script was altered entirely by this self-inflicted damage. Instead of a potential game-tying or game-winning field goal attempt under normal circumstances, the Falcons' penalties created artificial scoring opportunities. Kirk Cousins threw for 373 yards, and with a simple catch from a receiver, that total easily surpasses 400 yards with 4 touchdowns. It was simply a day where Kirk Cousins outperformed Baker Mayfield, who struggled with accuracy. Yet, as much as it may sound otherwise, I'm not engaged in a full-scale blame assignment. The degree of culpability you assign to Baker depends entirely on the pedestal upon which you placed him. If you genuinely believed he was an MVP-caliber, elite, system-proof quarterback on par with Josh Allen, capable of overcoming any obstacle, then you must assign him significant responsibility for this loss. If, however, you viewed him as a capable but flawed quarterback operating at a tier below the true elites, a player more dependent on his supporting structure, then you can logically apportion more blame to coaching, defensive lapses, offensive line play, and so forth. Even Baker's final stat line is somewhat deceptive. Players like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Trey Palmer made several spectacular, contested catches that bailed out imperfect throws. His numbers could have, and perhaps should have, been worse. The Falcons' penalty bonanza was the other dominant storyline. They gifted Tampa Bay 7 first downs via penalty. That is an almost unfathomable advantage to surrender. Several scoring drives, including touchdowns, were directly sustained by these infractions. In a cleaner game, it's plausible Baker's touchdown total is reduced. It's a tough outcome for the Buccaneers, though they remain in contention for the division, especially with a matchup against the Panthers looming. Mike Evans, despite appearing banged up during the game, was spectacular. A true alpha wide receiver. The broader landscape seems to be correcting itself. The Eagles are confronting their flaws. The Chiefs' vulnerabilities have been exposed, and the Cowboys' reality check has arrived. As for the Panthers, their identity remains a mystery. This was an entertaining, albeit frustrating game to watch due to the penalty parade. Baker Mayfield did make some excellent throws and plays. That is an integral part of his profile. What I largely see in Baker is a quarterback capable of brilliant game-winning throws and equally devastating game-losing decisions. He can occasionally try to do too much, and when the ecosystem around him isn't functioning optimally, he struggles to be the consistent, week-in, week-out carry artist. If Josh Allen can single-handedly will his team to victory 60% of the time under duress, I'd estimate Baker Mayfield's capacity to do so sits closer to 20%. That, to me, defines the difference in their respective tiers. Those are my reflections. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What's your assessment of Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers following this loss? How much responsibility do you assign to him versus the broader team context? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment, whether you agree or disagree. Let's foster some discussion, engage in some spirited debate, but ultimately, let's enjoy the conversation. Please consider subscribing. We're building a fantastic community here, and I'd love for you to be part of it. We're creating a space for genuine connection and shared passion for the game. Also, a thumbs up on the video genuinely helps with visibility. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.